All right, guys, today I just want to talk about the state of competitive play in Disney Lorcana. Now, I think the vast minority of people who are playing this game are playing it competitively, and the vast majority of people are casual players. So this really doesn't affect a large percentage of the Disney Lorcana player base, but it does affect the people who play the game competitively. And no, your 8-person tournaments at your LGS aren't really competitive, or they're not really super competitive. So I may say some things in this video like Lucky Dime control decks based around Lucky Dime are the best thing you can be doing. And you might think in your head, the guy who plays Lucky Dime at my local game store never wins. Well, he's just probably not very good. And, that's why he's not winning. But the best players are playing the best deck, and the best deck has Lucky Dime in it. And we're going to go over why that is. But first, I want to shift gears, and I want to talk about the new best of 2 format. A lot of people think that the best of 2 format solves the play draw problem. It doesn't really. They also think that it makes They also think that it makes it more fair because now you don't have to worry about winning a die roll. And before they were only losing because they lost the die roll, and their opponent got to go on the play twice, and their opponent lost on the draw, but they won on the play twice, and then that's why they lost. And it's not fair. It's not fair. Best of 3 isn't fair because sometimes I have to be on the draw twice. Sometimes I have to win a game on the draw. And so it needs to be changed. And that brought along best of 2. And now best of 2, each player is on the play once and each player is on the draw once. And I guess theoretically that is fair. But in practicality, the way that it actually works, it didn't make winning on the draw any less important. It actually made it more important. And we're going to look at that now. In this recent 367-person, $10,000 Pixelborn constructed tournament, the person who finished the 9 Swiss rounds in first place had 21 points. They did that by winning 6 of their rounds 2-0 and losing 0-2 in none of their rounds and drawing 3 times. So that means they won at least 6 of their 9 games on the draw. It's possible that they lost a game on the play and then won a game on the draw for one of their draws. So they could have won more than 6 times on the draw. And people were winning on the play. People were winning on the draw in this tournament like crazy because everyone's really sort of playing decks designed to do better on the draw now because they have to win a game on the draw in order to get the 3 points. It's very important to get the 3 points. A draw going 1-1 is closer to a loss than it is to a win because a draw you get 1 point, and the people that go 2-0 get 3 points, and the people that are 2-0ing just get so far ahead that you can't afford many draws. The same way that in a best of 3 tournament, you can't afford many losses. Now you have to not go 0-2, and you also have to not go 1-1 if you want to sniff the top 8 or the top 16. So this person won 6 of their rounds 2-0, and the other 3 they went 1-1. So 6 2-0s compared to 3 1-1s. Okay, so I want to go down all the way down to the last person to make the top 16 with 18 points. Now, there's a few different ways to get 18 points. They can win 5 rounds 2-0 for 15 points, get 3 draws for the other 3 points for 18, and then have 1 loss, which is, I believe, what he did. You can also win 6 rounds 2-0, and you can lose 3 rounds 0-2. But both of those options still require you to win more than half your games on the draw. You're either winning 5 of 9 on the draw or you're winning 6 of 9 on the draw, at least, because some of the matches where you go 1-1, you can lose on the play and win on the draw. So I don't know for sure exactly how they do it, but what I do know for sure is that the person who came in 16th, or the last person to make the top 16 cut, won at the very least 5 of their 9 games on the draw, and potentially they won 6 or maybe even 7 of their games on the draw. So if you want to make the top cut of any of these tournaments, you need to be 2-0ing the majority of the rounds, and you need to be winning the majority of your games on the draw. So winning on the draw is no less important than it has ever been. In fact, it's even more important now than it was before. So I'd like to just dispel this myth that switching from best of 3 to best of 2 somehow fixed the problem of the person being on the play being at a pretty big advantage. Because that still exists. There's still an advantage for being on the play. I don't think it's as big as a lot of you people do. Me personally, I'm winning over half my games on the draw. And the best players are winning even more than that. In my defense, I don't play tier 1 decks. I play like tier 2, tier 3 decks. But the best players who are playing the best decks are winning the vast majority of their games on the play, and they're winning the vast majority of their games on the draw. And you still need to win games on the draw if you want to win one of these tournaments. Because you won't even make it to the top cut if you're not winning 5 of your 9 or 6 of your 9 games on the draw. So, yes, best of 2 is here. A draw is closer to a loss than it is to a win. You need to 2-0 most of your rounds, which is a lot harder than 2-1ing most of your rounds. See, in a best of 3, there's a little more leeway, and I actually think it's easier to win a tournament that's playing best of 3 than it is to win a tournament that's playing best of 2. We're seeing people's response sort of to the best of 2 format in their deck list because they're playing decks that don't really concede much by being on the draw. In fact, some of these control decks might even prefer to be on the draw. I'm not sure. Probably not. I think I'd still rather be on the play. But the difference between play and draw with these control decks is not very big at all. So we're going to notice a common theme. In the top 8, we have a Ruby Sapphire deck that its main win condition is the Lucky Dime. The second place deck is a Steel Sapphire deck whose main win condition is the Lucky Dime. And then rounding out the top 8, we have 2 more. We have another Steel Sapphire and another Ruby Sapphire deck whose win condition is primarily the Lucky Dime. So 4 of the top 8 decks are Lucky Dime decks, and 2 of the top 2 decks are Lucky Dime decks. And I actually think the Steel Sapphire Lucky Dime deck is better than the Ruby Sapphire Lucky Dime deck because Steel Sapphire has access to a whole new world, which is the most busted card in all of Disney Lorcana. Probably shouldn't exist. It's absolutely busted, but it's super duper busted in this deck. And we're going to talk about why it did so well and why it can win so many games while being on the draw. And the reason that this deck wins so well on the draw is that it has ramp into removal. So they are going to play 1 jump ahead on turn 2. And now all of a sudden, even if they're on the draw, they have as much ink as you do. And then with the Fishbone Quill on turn 3, they get ahead in ink very quickly. And that allows them to clear the board with a Grab Your Swords, or to clear a board with a Tinkerbell, or to get a Robin Hood out and start clearing the board with Robin Hood. So they ramp up their ink, so they catch up in ink, and they actually get ahead in ink, and then they clear the board, and then they use a whole new world to even out, to actually gain card advantage, or to even card advantage. And now all of a sudden, after just a few turns, the advantage that you had being on the play no longer exists. And they're actually ahead of you on resources, they're ahead of you on cards, and they're ahead of you on lore, and you're just kind of getting your butt kicked. I don't even know if I want to even talk more about this deck. I don't know what else there is to say. It's pretty straightforward. It's not a hard deck to play. Neither is the Ruby Sapphire. you're mulliganing. You're looking at your first hand. If you don't see a fishbone quill, you're mulliganing every card basically that isn't a fishbone quill. I guess you can keep your develop your brains because they let you see 2 cards to get the fishbone quill. Like this whole deck just really wants to fishbone quill on turn 3. It wants to get cards out of their hand and ink them, and it wants to clear the board with grab your swords, and then it wants to sing a whole new world once their hand is close to empty and they have a bunch of ink. They can also play Bell. Bell allows them to ink an extra card too, so they can do some really super bonkers things where they just end up with a huge amounts of ink, and then they just refill their hand with a whole new world. And they don't even have to sing a whole new world. They can just pay the 5, because sometimes this deck will have 16, 17, 18. I've seen this deck get like 30 ink before, and they can just hard cast it, and then they can play. They have enough ink to play all the cards that they draw. Whole New World is busted. Whole New World is super busted. I can't believe it's a card. I can't believe they made this card. They're going to have to do something about it eventually. The sooner the better. I know this is probably going to upset a lot of people who love A Whole New World, but this card never works. Like Wheel of Fortune never didn't work, and this card is better than Wheel of Fortune because you can just play it for free all the time. You can Robin Hood on turn 3, shift Robin Hood, and just sing a whole new world, and it's kind of crazy. But the main win condition of this deck is the Lucky Dime. Lucky Dime is super good. Lucky Dime, I guess, is a must in control decks now because it's just so much better than whatever else you can be doing, because Lucky Dime is essentially unstoppable. I mean, they can remove the Lucky Dime with item removal, but you can just get it back with Tamatoa. If they play correctly, they're not gonna like lose their Lucky Dime. And what makes Lucky Dime so good is that it's unstoppable lore gain. So you play a Bell, Strange but Special. You have the 10 ink. It quests for 5 lore. You don't even have to get a quest in. So it's your turn. You play Bell. You Lucky Dime. You gain 5 lore, and then your opponent can remove it. They can Along Came Zeus it, or they can be prepared or whatever. But this control deck is just going to play something else after. They'll play Tamatoa, and then they'll Lucky Dime. They'll play another Bell, and they'll Lucky Dime. They'll play Cogsworth, and they'll Lucky Dime. It's just, this is the best control finisher, and so that's why we saw 4 of it in the top 8. And another thing to say about these, I'm actually going to go over to the Ruby Sapphire one just real fast. Another thing to say about these decks is there really isn't a deck that punishes it. There is the Emerald Steel discard deck that I think has a favorable matchup against it, but you can make them discard cards in their hand, but you still can't stop them from top decking things like Gaston or Flavor Sham and just drawing all those cards back. So you have to get your discard right, and then you have to hope that they don't top deck. And there are just so many top decks in this deck. Gaston, there's Develop Your Brain, Popsicle, everything is just drawing them extra cards. Like Scar, top deck a Scar to kill your whole board. Top deck a Be Prepared to blow up your whole board. There's just so much, Lady Tremaine, Madame Medusa, everything that they draw, Maui, is just value, and there are very few cards that are actually not top decks when it gets late game. Like they don't want to draw one jump ahead when they're very far behind. Let It Go might not be good enough. But Popsicles are going to draw them another card. Judy Hopps will draw them another card. Queen of Hearts isn't a super great top deck late game. Grabatala is not super great, but she still lets you draw another card. But for the most part, they're just, even when you make them discard their hand, they're still just drawing so much gas off the top of their deck that just making them discard isn't super duper reliable. What would be good against these decks is an aggro deck, but unfortunately, the aggro in this game is just very poorly designed. Aggro is in a terrible spot, and that it's just like completely outclassed by the removal cards. Like, I don't, you can't, as an aggro deck, you can't beat someone shifting Robin Hood on turn 3 and then singing a Grab Your Swords. You can't beat someone playing a Cinderella on turn 1 and then just singing Let the Storm Rage On, killing your guy, drawing a card, and then just do that for the whole game. So aggro is not even playable. There are no aggro decks, and that's a problem because all these games are designed on paper, scissors, rocks, which is aggro beats control, control beats mid-range, and mid-range beats aggro. All we really have, every deck is really kind of a control deck, right? Control deck. We have Amethyst Ruby Bounce here that came in third, but this is a control deck. This still wants to be prepared. It still has the Queen's Castle. You know, they're just trying to be prepared, have a Queen's Castle out, and then all their cards are giving them card advantage. They're playing Merlin Rabbit, and they're bouncing it back to their hand a zillion times to draw a zillion cards. This is a control deck. And so top 4 here, this green steel, this isn't a control deck. It's not an aggro deck. It's a discard deck. I guess it's sort of taking aggro's spot in the paper, scissors, rocks. We have discard beats control sometimes. It's not guaranteed, but this is probably Ruby Sapphire and Steel Sapphire's worst matchup, but it's far from unwinnable. But there is no aggro deck. This PE bounce deck, right? This Amethyst Emerald bounce deck, this isn't an aggro deck. Like, Rafiki's not an aggro card. Curse Merfolk and Flynn Rider, like, that's sort of like an aggro line. But this isn't an aggro deck. They're not doing aggro things. This is more of a tempo deck. But even they still have Queen's Castle. Like, every deck has a sort of go long, control-y games. There is no, like, all out, I want to play as much lore as fast as I possibly can. There's no, like, Lorcana version of Sly. Even the faster decks are still kind of slow because the removal is just so strong that they need to have a way to win outside of just play Guy Quest. And I know, like, you know, maybe people don't like aggro decks that can win on turn 4 or turn 5, but they're totally necessary to keep things like 4 of the top 8 decks being Lucky Dime decks. Like, Lucky Dime is slow. Lucky Dime is so very, very, very slow, and and it can't be taken advantage of because aggro is so bad. Like, we can scroll down forever, and we're not going to see an aggro deck. None of these are aggro decks. Popsicles, Bounce, Popsicles, Mufasa. They're all control decks, with the exception of, like, Mufasa's more of a mid-range deck. The Steel Song is still sort of a control deck, right? Because it gets the aerials out, and then it just starts blowing up all your guys with songs. It's still just heavy removal, like, control the board, and then cast a whole new world when it's very advantageous for yourself. But we're in the top 64. There's not an aggro deck in the top 64. It's all Popsicles. It's all Lucky Dimes. Like, Lucky Dime is everywhere. There's some discard. There's some Ruby Amethyst Bounce. There's a lot of Steel Song that finished outside of the top 16. But there's no aggro. I'm still not seeing an aggro deck because aggro is unplayable. Tempo Control? What is Tempo Control? I don't even think I can see this deck. I don't know what Tempo Control is. Anyway, it wasn't very good. It didn't. We're in the top 128. I still don't see an aggro deck. I'm gonna keep going down until I see an aggro deck. Mufasa aggro. I guess this is a Mufasa, um, where Mufasa is the end of the curve. It's probably the most expensive card in their deck, which is an interesting deck. So the first, I've actually played a similar deck to this. So the first aggro deck that we see finished just inside of the top 128. So when you don't have aggro decks, you end up with nonsense like Lucky Dime everywhere. So that is the current, I guess it's just turned into a rant, but that is the current state of competitive Disney Lorcana. Just super slow, boring control matches with the occasional discard deck that just draws well enough to sneak inside top 8s, top 16s, and do very well. But there's just one. There's just one of these in the top 16, it looks like. Yeah, there's one. There's one deck that isn't Lucky Dime. Or is there two? There's two in the top 16. And there's a couple of Steel Songs in the top 16. And Mufasa actually made it in the top 16. So Corey Patrick must have drawn super, super well, because this is a hard deck to get in the top 16 of a tournament like this. Anyway, if you want to win a large tournament like this, you basically have to be playing a control deck. Or you can get very lucky with this discard deck here. But that is the state of competitive Disney Lorcana. It's not good. Hopefully it gets better.